You already notice that some people seem to arrive late to their own lives. They spend years in silence, withdrawing from the noise, disappearing from social circles, while others accumulate visible achievements, post victories, display linear and brilliant trajectories. And then, suddenly, something happens with these quiet people. They emerge, not as someone returning from a pause, but as someone who finally arrived from a deep place others never visited. You probably know someone like that. Perhaps deep down, you suspect that someone might be you. There is a pattern in this kind of trajectory that conventional psychology does not explain well. The usual metrics of success, speed, productivity, visibility, fail to capture what happens to those who go through a genuine spiritual awakening. Carl Jung was one of the few thinkers who took this process seriously, not as metaphor, not as religious language, but as a real psychological phenomenon with structure, phases, and measurable consequences in a person's life. Jung did not speak about enlightenment as a destination. He spoke about individuation, and that concept changes everything. Individuation, for Jung, is not a self-help project. It is not a weekend course or a meditation technique. It is the process by which a person stops living the life others wrote for them and begins, often painfully, to truly inhabit themselves. Jung said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." And this awakening, contrary to what most people imagine, is not gentle. It begins with rupture, with discomfort, with the unsettling feeling that what worked before, the masks, the roles, the approval-seeking strategies, simply stopped working. You have probably felt this at some point. That moment when you realized you were living a life that was not entirely yours. That the choices you were making followed a script you had never consciously approved. That there was something inside you, a voice, a tension, a nameless dissatisfaction, that kept knocking, insistent, like someone on the inside of a locked door. That is the signal that the process has begun. And it is precisely at this point that most people run, because what is on the other side of that door is not only light. There is shadow there. Jung called the shadow everything you reject in yourself, hide from others, and push down for years, sometimes decades. Not only flaws, but also the talents that frighten you, the desires that feel too large, the parts of you that were called wrong before you were old enough to disagree. The shadow does not disappear because you ignore it. It accumulates. And it is that accumulation that, later in life, erupts as crisis, as burnout, as destroyed relationships, as an exhaustion that no amount of rest seems to heal. You are not tired of working. You are tired of not being yourself. The problem is that the world does not wait for those who are in process. The world rewards performance, speed, rapid adaptation to external expectations. When you begin to pause, to question, to refuse certain demands, the people around you notice. And many of them become uncomfortable, not because they care about your well-being, but because you were fulfilling a function in their system. You were predictable, useful, available, and now you are not. Spiritual awakening threatens the status quo of others before anything else. That is the real villain of this story. Not a person, but an entire system of expectations that profited from your unconsciousness. This system is subtle. It does not present itself as oppression. It presents itself as belonging, as responsibility, as this is just how things work. You were taught from an early age that adapting was synonymous with maturity. That questioning too much was ingratitude. That feeling too deeply was weakness. And you believed it, not out of naivety, but because the alternative was isolation. So you built what Jung called the persona, the social mask that shows the world what it wants to see. The problem is that the more perfect the mask, the more suffocated the person beneath it becomes. And here the shift begins. Spiritual awakening is not, at its core, a religious experience. It is the moment the persona cracks. When the mask becomes too heavy. When the cost of continuing to pretend surpasses the fear of being truly seen. And it is precisely in that moment, which feels like collapse, which looks like failure, which seems like the worst point of your life, that individuation truly begins. Jung was precise. What is not made conscious comes to us as fate. The crisis is not the end of the road. It is the entrance to another level of existence. Those who cross through this process emerge differently, not merely calmer or more spiritual in a superficial sense. They emerge with something others recognize, even without being able to name it. Real authenticity. The capacity to speak without needing approval, to make choices without apologizing for them, to tolerate uncertainty without collapsing, to love without losing themselves in love. These are not abstract virtues. They are rare competencies, built in the depths of the process, while the world saw only someone who had slowed down or lost their way. If you are in this process, you will find deep value in Jung's own writings, especially in the ego and the unconscious, where he unfolds each phase of this journey with extraordinary precision. The practical effects of awakening manifest across every area of life, but they follow a sequence that few describe honestly. First, you stop reacting automatically. The provocations that once controlled you, the criticism that used to devastate, the rejection that used to define you, begin to lose their power. Not because you became numb, but because you created a distance between the stimulus and the response. That distance is power. It is the difference between being swept away by the current and learning to swim inside it. Then you begin to attract a different kind of connection. People who connect with who you actually are, not with who you were pretending to be. But before that, you will lose. That is the part no one announces at the beginning of the process. You will lose relationships that depended on your performance. You will lose environments that only tolerated you when you were masked. You will lose a certain version of yourself that, despite being suffocating, was familiar. And it will hurt in a strange way, because you will grieve something that was no longer serving you. Jung understood this deeply. Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate what matters most. That is the real price of awakening. But it is a price that everyone who reached the other side has never regretted paying. The success that comes after this process is of a different nature entirely. It is not success built on the need to prove something. It is not driven by the fear of not being enough. It is the success that emerges when you act from what is real inside you, from abilities you did not perform, but that were distilled through the process itself. People who have gone through individuation build with greater consistency because they no longer need external validation to keep going. They carry an internal compass that does not depend on applause to function. And that, over the long term, is a genuine competitive advantage, not a strategy, but as the natural consequence of someone who truly knows themselves. Start small. The process does not require you to abandon everything tomorrow. It requires you to begin being honest in doses you can sustain. Notice where you say yes when you want to say no. Pay attention to the environments where you make yourself smaller to fit in. Observe the conversations where you filter who you are in order to be accepted. Question 1. Inherited belief per week. Sit in silence for 10 minutes without filling the void with stimulation. Write what you feel without editing it to seem more acceptable. These are not abstract spiritual gestures. They are concrete acts of individuation, practiced in daily life, one at a time. What is born on the other side of this process is not a perfect version of you. It is a true version of you. And true is far rarer than perfect. First comes the silence. That uncomfortable silence in which the old voices lose their authority, and your own voice is still learning to speak. Then comes the clarity, the ability to see situations, people, and patterns with a sharpness that did not exist before. Then comes the peace, not the absence of conflict, but the presence of a center that does not shift with every external wind. You stop being a reactor, and you begin to be a creator. If you stayed until the end of this video, it is because something in what was said resonated with something that was already inside you before you even clicked play. Leave a comment below. Are you at the beginning of this process, in the middle of it, or have you already crossed a rupture that transformed you? And if this idea made sense to you, write this in the comments. I am waking up. Because sometimes putting it into words is the first real act of recognition. Keep watching the next video. It matters, far more than you realize.